the thought is, if you come about this more so with the goal of helping people understand where you're coming from and to understand the other person, and the side benefit, I think, if anything, is like, hey, if I, in the process of sharing my viewpoint, if it means that you come along my side of thinking, okay. If you don't, that's fine too. But that's not really the ultimate goal. And I think you hit it on the nail. It's like more so if you go about it understanding, even how you phrase it, right? If you're going about saying I had an argument with someone, you're going off of saying it's more transactional, it's more competitive. It's like, did you win or did you lose?
Do you see yourself as a great critical thinker? Do you often have disagreements at work or with friends? Have you put much thought into the way leaders and colleagues should disagree, or how to do so without disrespecting each other, without losing friends, without harming relationships? I'll try not to get on my soapbox too much for this episode, but I do confess it's quite difficult with this subject matter. A central belief of many aspects of philosophy, certainly of democracy, maybe even of politics, depending on your views of that, but something that has long been a guiding principle, if you like, maybe until recent years. Often misquoted to Voltaire, although largely in the spirit of his writings, I think, is the phrase, "I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it." Familiar words, I hope. And they do speak to so many issues of life, leadership, organizational, citizenship even, politics, free speech, the list goes on and on. Regular listeners will have heard me discuss several times with guests probably about the impact of social media, the dying art of critical thought and friendly debate, and the divisiveness that we've seen sometimes in modern society and even in our workplaces. Central to that theme is this idea that too many of us seem to be forgetting. It's okay to disagree with someone. Disagreement doesn't automatically mean animosity. Disrespect isn't necessary to explain an opposing view. Differing political views should not mean differing workplaces. And this question is also pivotal to effective leadership in businesses and elsewhere. Too many of us, I think, have worked in cultures where disagreeing about the wrong thing at the wrong time in the wrong way, or just dissent of any kind, is stigmatized, reprimanded, punished. But great leaders recognize the value in those opposing views. They see the benefits of healthy confrontation, and they are active in the way they encourage and develop these things within their teams. Which is a long-winded introduction and a roundabout way of saying that my guest today is Philip Blackett. He's an author, a consultant, an entrepreneur who previously has worked with big companies ranging from FedEx, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, and beyond. He's got a master's in divinity from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He has an MBA from Harvard Business School, and one of the several books that he has written is entitled Disagree Without Disrespect: How to Respectfully Debate with Those Who Think, Believe, and Vote Differently from You, which is, of course, incredibly relevant to the topic we'll be discussing today and everything I've said so far. We'll be looking at this and other subjects, such as the responsible use of AI or the fundamental nature of democracy, from both Philip's expertise and the point of view of good leadership. I hope you enjoy listening. Hopefully it won't be too controversial for you this episode today, and do drop us a rating or a review. Give me your feedback. Let me know what you think.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Philip, welcome to Leading with Integrity. It's great to have you on the show. Really looking forward to our conversation. It's a point of interest or vague frustration for me at your core subject here, so I'm really looking forward to getting into it with you.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it, David. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks for being here as well. And well, to kick us off, I'm going to hand over to you for a little while to introduce yourself, tell the listeners a bit about your background, what you do today, why you do it, what gets you out of bed in the morning, really.
Well, it's definitely a loaded question, so I'll try my best to get it in 30 seconds or less if possible, which now I'm probably 3 seconds already into it, so I better speed up. So my name is Philip Blackett. I'm born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee in the United States. Southerner at heart, went to school at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, worked at Wall Street, Fortune 500, corporate America, that sort of thing, done some entrepreneur endeavors. Later went to the business school in Harvard, in Boston, and later got my seminary degree, my Master of Divinity degree from the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. I am a husband, the father of twin daughters that are 7 years old. And at this stage in my life, as I'm approaching 40, is really looking at entrepreneurship in a different fashion than I did before. I've authored 6 books this year. The one that I'm speaking about most right now is Disagree Without Disrespect: How to Respectfully Debate with Those Who Think, Believe, and Vote Differently from You, which is a pretty timely topic given the time we're recording this interview, not just in America, but I would think worldwide. And what gets me out in the morning, out of bed, is just the joy of living another day with my family, and also another opportunity to bring some value to the world around me. And that's what I'm hoping to do here as well.
Excellent. Well, I was going to ask you about the book. I didn't realize you'd written 6 of them. That's quite impressive in a short period of time as well. Are they all similar themes or different subjects? Or
so outside of Disagree Without Disrespect, we got 2 books on AI or artificial intelligence, and then 3 books that are more on the political, religious areas or topics. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at this point.
Let's talk about Disagree Without Disrespect then. Tell us a bit more about the book, what led you to writing it, and I guess a synopsis. What's it about?
Yeah, so I think what got me to writing the book, David, was, you just kind of look around you and you notice that we're at a place right now, society-wise, cultural-wise, that we seem to be very intolerant of different opinions. We talk a lot about diversity, yet we don't have a clear love and embrace of diversity of thought, right? And so I think what's going on in my head here is, something that impacted my family in particular. The genesis of this book came from an interaction we had among my sister and I when our families were coming together for 4th of July in Boston. We were going to talk about a particular issue that we are on opposite sides of the spectrum on. And my mother jumped in like a referee almost and said, nope, we're not going to have this conversation. And I understood what her intent was, which basically was, we have fireworks coming on later on tonight for 4th of July. I don't want to see fireworks happening before between you two, which on the surface, David, sounds like, okay, that makes sense. The mom is just trying to preserve family harmony and order and peace so we can come back together again another holiday. The challenge that came out of that, though, the impact for me was this was a missed opportunity for me and my sister to bond, which oddly enough sounds weird because you're thinking to yourself, okay, bond over conflict. And I would say, yeah, because oftentimes we live in a place where in order for us to preserve order and peace, we don't talk about issues that matter to us, or we're very selective on who we talk about these issues with because we can't trust people with who we truly are. And so this was an opportunity where I felt like we could share that, where my viewpoint was more in the minority in the household. But nevertheless, it was significant to me because that's what I believe in. And I wanted to share it with my sister, but unfortunately, that opportunity didn't transpire. And what came out of my mind in reflection, David, was, okay, if that was the case with me and that was the experience that I lived out, and I'm just one person, how many other people, not just in America, but in United Kingdom and globally, are probably going through something similar, where the thought of really being true to yourself, even if it means you believing in things that others don't agree with you on, can you truly be yourself in these circles? Not just with family, but also with significant others, dating, in the workplace, the teams we work with, and that sort. Um, to me, it's just a really big concern. I think partly it is something where we just lost the rules of engagement on how to go about different views of thought. It's not that we just now came across disagreements. We've had disagreements since the beginning of time, I would say. And when I was growing up, there's a way you navigated that. And this book is hopefully trying to remind people that we can navigate a world of disagreements and different points of view. And here's a framework that we can share as far as how you go about doing that, where you can still keep the relationship with somebody and still respect and love that person, even if you disagree on how someone thinks or sees the world.
You're so right, particularly the diversity of thought. We hear a lot, don't we, about all of the diversities, whether it's race or gender or sexuality. All of those are, of course, important, but so is diversity of thought. And not many people really seem to talk about that, at least in a workplace context, in terms of trying to get the best for your decision making even. And that also plays into, of course, exactly what you're talking about, is the ability to have safe disagreements.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, you're not going to arrive at a decision if you've not talked through and considered all of the different options, are you? Or if you do, it's not a very good decision. It is interesting. I mean, politics is the obvious one, isn't it? Because I think that's the one that hits the headlines the most, isn't it? And that certainly is where this issue seems to have come into sharp relief, if you like.
And the thing about it too, David, is like a lot of people will look at the subtitle of the book and then see vote, and they'll think it is a political book. And the misconception behind that is it really isn't. It's a part of it. But what I'm talking about is something that doesn't happen every election cycle. It doesn't happen every 2 to 4 years. This is something that happens every day, because what we're essentially dealing with is interpersonal relationships we have with the people around us. Because I can guarantee you, if I got to know you well enough, David, there'd be things that I agree with you on. And there's things that I probably have a disagreement about. Right. And that is okay, but we shouldn't have it in a sense where it's like, believing this lie that to love someone or respect someone, they have to be aligned with us 100% of the issues at hand. And so when I think about people who think differently, people who believe differently, people who vote differently, this is really dealing with relationships with everybody we come across, not just on the political front.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's a funny one, isn't it? I think it would be a pretty boring world, wouldn't it, if everyone agreed with everyone all the time? We all had the same point of view on everything. We all shared the same values and priorities. I mean, that'd be a pretty monotonous existence, I reckon.
Well, just imagine too, David, like what if we all, like every one of us loved the same sports team? You would get to the point where you don't have opposing teams. You just have one team playing itself.
Yeah.
Right. Or just playing by itself. Maybe there's no opposition. So it's the thought of what makes things exciting is, there's groups of people that go for certain things. If some people like Mexican food versus, British food, I don't know. I think that's the kind of thing where it's just like one way or the other. If you have a more homogenous society and culture where we all thought the same, to your point, it'd be a very boring world to live in. And it was never designed to be that way in the first place.
No, absolutely. And whenever I'm talking about this sort of subject, it comes up quite a lot, at the pub with friends when we're complaining about social media usually. But I'm always reminded of that quote it's very often misquoted to Voltaire, isn't it? And I don't think he actually said it, but it's I may disagree with what you said, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it.
I like that quote. And
it's a great quote, but he didn't say it.
I have attributed to Voltaire, honestly, admittedly to it. I'd love to know who actually said it, but I think the quote was great.
Yeah, it is a great quote. I think it was in the 1920s. It was somebody at like a meeting of the Friends of Voltaire Society or something. And it's not, they were paraphrasing his work basically. So I guess it's a secondary quote, isn't it? It's sort of the intent of what he meant, but not his actual words. I think, anyway, based on my Google research. So,
but to your point, though, David, even if you just took that quote,
yeah,
like imagine the world around us if we all had a similar feeling. Like, I may disagree with you, but I'll defend to the death your right to speak it, because you also have groups of people that say, hey, if you have opposition to what I think, you should not speak it. You should not have a platform to share it. In fact, if there's ways that I can silence you or cancel you, I'll do it. And whether that's social media or if that's the media in general, it's becoming a world where many of our news sources are more slanted towards particular political parties or particular sides of the political spectrum, that it's becoming more like propaganda rather than actual journalism being reported. And it's like if you have a certain, angle that's different from what they're trying to pump out to people, you won't get covered. They'll have no interest to put you in the newspaper, on the TV show, on the podcast and that sort. So at the very least, that quote is very helpful for us to say, hey, listen, it'd be a great value for us to have globally to say, hey, listen, we may disagree, but I appreciate and will respect and will defend your right to say it and have that freedom of speech.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's fundamental, isn't it, really, to a functioning democracy, in my opinion, anyway. We're going way off topic here, but it's interesting, so we'll carry on. Yeah, so, I mean, it's easy to blame the algorithm, isn't it? And I can understand why the social media side of it works that way. It's because it's about ad revenue, isn't it, ultimately? So the more of one thing you read, the more of that thing it will show you, which is great, except when it comes to political discourse, in which case it's pretty actually counterproductive, I would suggest. And there's all that Cambridge Analytica stuff, and Facebook have been in trouble, all of this sort of stuff. Outside of that particular part of it, though, do you think that's enough of an explanation for why society is moving away from that proper ability to disagree like that? Or is there a wider trend at play, do you think? What's the cause?
Well, I think a part of it is, along with social media and media, we're being influenced on how we feel is the right way to act. What's the right way for us to behave towards each other, right? And so oftentimes use the first source of learning how to act and how to grow up and how to be influenced to act a certain way is from your parents, from your family. That usually is the starting block, right? As opposed to being raised or babysitted by the tablets or by YouTube and that sort. It was your mother and father that shared with you what those values were, to say, hey, you may disagree with that person, but you ought to listen to them. My mom taught me, hey, you might disagree with this news channel, but you ought to be at least exposed to see what the other side thinks. So you just, if nothing else, have a better knowledge of what's important to them. And even if you were to debate them, it makes sense to know what their argument is to better prepare yours. But we're not teaching that. We have, influencers, quote unquote, that are people that have thousands or millions of followers. And we look at that as enough credibility to say, hey, whatever you say goes, I'll do it. But what they're saying oftentimes is not leading them the right path. Right. So I think a part of it is not just the media and social media, but it's like, where are we getting our instruction on this? Where are we getting our teaching as far as how to be productive, respectful adults growing up? And oftentimes the culture itself and who we listen to has a great reason as far as why a lot of us are going the wrong way on it.
I think it's interesting as well, the way you even frame the conversations as well. So, I mean, a lot of people just describe it as I had an argument with, whoever it was, Steve down the pub, whoever. I prefer to just see it as a conversation. And then also there's that reframing as well about what's your intent, what's your goal from that conversation. Mm-hmm. I think we're too easily now, we're defaulting into I'm right, the other person's wrong. Therefore, in this conversation, I will persuade them why I'm right. And then at the end of it, they'll agree with me. Whereas actually, exactly as you kind of described just now, the goal and the intent of these conversations, even if you want to call them disagreements, I don't know, not always, actually should be about gaining understanding. You don't have to persuade or convert everyone to your point of view. That's okay. People are allowed to disagree with you. You know, we live in a free society, most of us. So really, all you want to do is understand their point of view. And you might end up thinking, well, actually, yeah, I kind of agree with that at the end of it. It's having that open mind versus no, I'm right. If you think you're right at the start of the conversation, then you probably will think that at the end of the conversation as well.
Yep. No, I agree. I think you said it perfectly. The thought is, if you come about this more so with the goal of helping people understand where you're coming from and to understand the other person, and the side benefit, I think, if anything, is like, hey, if I, in the process of sharing my viewpoint, if it means that you come along my side of thinking, okay. If you don't, that's fine too. But that's not really the ultimate goal. And I think you hit it on the nail. It's like more so if you go about it understanding, even how you phrase it, right? If you're going about saying I had an argument with someone, you're going off of saying it's more transactional, it's more competitive. It's like, did you win or did you lose? You don't want to lose. So you're going to do whatever it takes to appease your ego so you can appear superior to your opponent and win the argument, rather than looking at it as we had a conversation, me and my friend, me and my colleague, me and my partner, and we discuss different ways of looking at this thing. Here's how we made it out. And we still open the door for further conversation later on, as opposed to if you went transactional, win, lose, that's probably one and done because the person that you fought with probably doesn't want to talk to you again now.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, because the subject of this podcast is leadership, after all, we're going to tie it back to that right now by saying this is, of course, an essential skill for leaders as well. If you approach these conversations with people as the objective being to build understanding rather than, I don't know, trying to build consensus even, can be quite problematic sometimes as well, because not everyone's going to agree with the stated plan of action. And again, that's okay. And you've got to be able to lead a team knowing that that's okay, and that without consensus, maybe with consent, to at least agree on a plan, even if they don't agree with the objective or the way of doing it. And again, I do feel like that is something of a dying skill, isn't it, in a lot of workplaces these days?
I agree, right? It makes me think of, I think it was a book that I think maybe President Abraham Lincoln might have coined or written, but it was like Team of Rivals, to paraphrase. It was just the thought of like, having people that agree with you and disagree with you on your cabinet once you became president. And a lot of people would think like, oh, well, that makes no sense. You're not going to get any work done. You're not going to make any progress because you have people opposing you every move you make. And it was like, no, the thought is that the challenge with that as a leader is that you're more so in a position of trying to hear everyone's viewpoint and still come up with something that works out for everyone. It may involve compromises. It may have some people that agree to disagree. But to your point, David, whether politically or, in business or any sort of team dynamic where leadership is involved, very rarely do you have consensus every time. At some point, you have to say, listen, do you have enough supporters to move on this? But do you also have the people that may have objected or may have opposed? Do you still lead in the fashion that they still support you in the process of what you decided to do? Because once again, it comes off as a sense like, okay, I can only lead if I have people that agree with me. That's not always going to be the case. And history has proven that. So why would it be any different going forward now to think that the only way you can lead is if you have consensus all the time? No, learning how to appreciate and hear out diverse viewpoints to come at the best decision for your team ultimately, and then be able to do it in a way that you're not alienating people that have differences of opinion. They still feel included and involved and part of the team. That, okay, if they didn't get their way, they can still respect you enough to say, hey, I was thinking something different, but I support you and the team on us moving forward, right? As opposed to that person saying, I don't want to be a part of this team, I quit.
I can't remember who it was. It was a post on LinkedIn months ago, so it's totally gone from my mind who it was, but they were talking about this consent versus consensus. And I do say, I'd suggest actually you will never succeed at anything if all you do is try to build consensus, because as you say, it's never going to happen. Very rarely, maybe like 1% of the time, you might get everyone who will agree. unless you've gone out and actively only recruited people you know will agree with you, in which case you're going to fail for other reasons, most likely.
Like you have your own echo chamber, right? Your own algorithm in your team to say, hey, I have people that think the same, but you're not even considering those who think differently. And so you're not even exposed to another alternative that could be helpful for you.
Not all decisions are going to be black and white and have good and bad and right and wrong outcomes. But in the situations where they are, because sometimes there is going to be a right or wrong answer. You're much less likely to realize if you've got the wrong answer if you've only got people in the room who are going to agree with you. So that's always been for me the reason. It's groupthink, isn't it? That's the psychological phenomena, isn't it, that describes it. And that's always been for me the main reason why I want people to disagree with me.
Right.
Especially in a room where you're making a decision like that. And obviously it was what was being talked about in that book as well. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team as well, a great book on that kind of subject. Right. They talk about it at great length in there. Really well written as well. Love that book. So disagreeing with people without disrespecting them, you have a 5-step framework, which I assume is what the book covers. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a bit of a sneak preview of what that framework looks like and how it works?
Yeah, essentially it's one where, let's put in the framework of leadership, right? Let's say it's a scenario where you're in a team meeting. It's a group of 5, and the leader is one of those 5 people. And you're trying to decide how to move forward on a particular project. And there's 2 alternatives you're trying to decide on, right? So I'm trying to conceptualize this in something that's real. Solution A, solution B, right? While you're engaging that, the first step is separating the idea or belief from the identity of the believer. So what happens oftentimes for some people is that you might be so intertwined to one solution and one way of going about it that it almost is wedded to the identity of who you are. And so if I said, I do not like solution B because XYZ, you're so connected to it, and now you take it personal and think that I'm critiquing you. And I'm saying that you are a bad person. And so that mentally now you're shutting down potentially because in this team meeting, I'm saying that the solution is bad. You're taking it personal, almost like I'm embarrassing you in front of the team. And now your guard gets up. Now you get defensive. And now you're more driven by making sure your ego isn't bruised. Even though I'm not attacking you, I'm attacking the solution. Now we get into step 2. Step 2 is you can disagree with the belief and still love the believer. So this is kind of a play of what I've learned in church, where it's hate the sin, love the sinner. So I may disagree with solution B, but part of my goal while disagreeing is affirming the believer, solution B, that I still respect you as a part of the team. I still appreciate you as a person. Me disagreeing with you on solution B does not take away your value to the team. And I don't want you to think that. I don't want you to think that I'm coming after you or I'm trying to embarrass you in front of the rest of the team. So keeping that clear as far as we're just talking about solution A versus solution B, and it's not getting personal, and it shouldn't get personal when you get to the debate. Now let's get into step 3. Talk about the idea at hand, solution A versus solution B, just based on its merit. What we're talking about, facts, research, logic, analysis, performance, results, just on its merit, is solution A better than solution B? We're not getting into anything personal, where if I had not affirmed the person who believed in solution B, I'm not getting into any name calling. I'm not trying to get into any yelling or shouting matches. I'm not trying to get into any overdrawn out emotional reactions where just by me disagreeing with you on solution B in front of the team, now it gets you in such an emotional stir that now I'm looking for Kleenex to wipe your eyes And I'm awkwardly trying to figure out how do I move forward on this? Because now it seems like I hurt your feelings, but it was never personal. It was just talking about the solution at hand. So if we talk about the merits there, then we can actually just debate based on which one is better. Try to be as objective as we possibly can. Doesn't mean you can't use emotion as part of your reasoning, but not too much emotion where now it takes away from the issue at hand. Step 4, once you debate the whole issue, whether you won or you lost, whether solution A wins or solution B wins, let's be just like how we were in youth sports at the end of a competition, whether we won or lost. What do we do as teams? Lined up, shook hands, said good game. We don't have to necessarily line up here, but we can at least be good sports about what took place. We're not going to be sore losers. We're not going to be sore winners either. This is still part of your team, so you are able to, decompress the debate situation, for lack of a better word, and come back as a team to say, hey, just like you said before, David, it's not so much consensus, but consent in terms of, hey, based on its merits, we're going to go with solution A. And as a team, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on solution B. And this gets to the last step, step 5, that even though solution B didn't win, I'm going to respect and appreciate the person that had a different opinion than I did. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your perspective on this in a realm of appreciating diversity of thought. And you keep the door open to continue building a relationship with that person where if there's an opportunity to learn more about that person's viewpoint on why they thought solution B was better, or being able to keep tabs with him or her, where as you're progressing, if there's certain things about solution B that maybe we can embody or envelope into solution A to help address certain weaknesses of solution A, that might be a win. Or it might be the sense of just saying, hey, staying included with the team, your voice is still important. We appreciate whenever you share, and we want to encourage you to share what's on your mind, even if it's, different from what we're thinking, because that's a different perspective that could be helpful for us as we progress as a team. And so a leader in that setting, being able to have that type of framework with those 5 steps, I think that that's more likely the way to go to help people when they have different viewpoints, because you're appreciating the diversity of thought. You're using that as a way to help come up with the best solution that might be more innovative, that might tackle some of the weaknesses of what you were previously thinking about. And it helps build better relations among team members, and they feel more connected. They feel more trusting of one another, more comfortable to be who they are and share what's on their mind. And as a result, you have a stronger team moving forward.
Yeah, sometimes the role of a leader in these situations is just to break a stalemate, isn't it? And when you view it in that consent instead of consensus terms, it is a much more productive way of doing it. I think gaining that consent and maintaining that team cohesion, a very important aspect in doing that is letting everyone have their say and hearing them out. And I think that's where a lot of leaders go off the rails a bit on this sort of thing, because they just walk into the room and think, right, I'm in charge, I'll make the decision, tell me the options, then that's it, I'll click my fingers and we'll go with option A or B. And they forget that actually people will probably put a lot of work into preparing options A and B, and maybe you should hear about what they think about it before you make that decision.
Right. Like people, like one of the things I've realized that might be a reason that people leave work is they don't feel heard. Right. So it might be the sense like I've put so much effort and time and resources in my presentation. At least hear them out, even if you already are coming in thinking that you're going to go a different direction. So it's one that comes into mind where it's just like, okay, just the act of actively listening to somebody, asking clarifying questions, not to poke holes in their reasoning, but just to better understand. Even if that person doesn't get the result they're looking for, at least they can come away saying, you know what, David heard me out though. He asked questions. He was curious. He was respectful. He genuinely wanted to know what I thought. He took good consideration of what I said. And then he also shared why he thought it was best to go a different direction after hearing me out. And then affirmed me and sharing what I had to say and included me in the decision and sharing appreciation for me to share those thoughts. Like, that's the type of approach you would want anybody to have on the receiving end, even if they didn't get ultimately what they wanted, because at least they're coming off not thinking that you're a jerk, that you're somebody that just glossed over them or just heard them briefly just to say you did, just to check a box. It's just that you actually cared. You actually cared about what they had to say, and you actually cared about who they are as a person as part of your team.
Absolutely. And you're appreciating their contribution, the effort they're putting in, all of those things. But also, if you as the leader want to have any kind of long-term relationship with the people you're leading, you've got to make them feel heard, haven't you? You've got to do these things, because otherwise, as soon as you make that snap decision without including anyone, as you say, that's a major reason why people leave. So, unless you want them to leave, in which case, yeah, do that. It's all good. That wasn't my sanctioned advice, anyone. Anyway, so I think we've talked already a bit, well, quite some detail actually, about why that's an important skill for modern managers. It's certainly necessary for the workplace. So I think it's not just for leaders, is it really? It's about anyone at any level of a company. You're going to do yourself much less harm in the long run if you can go into these meetings, these conversations with that open mind and with the right kind of approach to disagreement. Let's talk a bit about some of your businesses and experiences in the corporate world. I know that you had a business that you shut down, I think, shortly after the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Would you like to tell us a bit about that story to start with, and then maybe tell us some of the biggest lessons that you gained from that particular experience?
Yeah, so it was a business that focused on operating, managing cemeteries. And it was something that we were going through a lot of ups and downs after the pandemic. And it got to a point where, after a number of adjustments I was making at the helm, we just got to a point where we just could not keep sustaining ourselves. We lost a customer, and that basically put us at odds of being able to make payroll on a consistent basis. And so at that point, having to make a tough decision that, after exhausting all other options to take care of everyone involved, we still fell short. Having to make that tough decision to let the team know, be completely transparent with them, and let them know of next steps as far as how to move on and how to make sure that they transition to a right place, along with our customers as well, and then move on from there, right? It's a decision I never wanted to make, never anticipated making. But part of leadership is sometimes you get hit with things that you weren't expecting, that you have to make tough decisions on, that you weren't hoping to make, but also having to realize, okay, how do we make the best out of this situation? And how do we move forward from here? That's what makes particular leaders that I look up to very resilient. And I try to model that myself. And so I think some of the lessons I learned from it was, one, looking out for those beyond just yourself, as far as your team and your customers, and making sure that they're okay, and often putting an effort to make sure they're okay, even at the expense of yourself. I think another lesson that comes out of that is being clear in your communication with them, being raw with them. Don't hide yourself behind like corporate boilerplate language, corporate speak or jargon. You just talk to people just like they're human beings that are working alongside you, which they were. I think that, even if it's bad news or hard news for them to accept, people can at least appreciate you being on the same level as them, talking to them directly, answering their questions candidly, and offering to be a resource as we make the transition. So I think that's kind of part of, a few of the lessons that come off top of mind for me. But yeah, it's just, that was a hard moment for me for sure in my career. One of the hardest moments in my career, I would say. it was also one of the biggest crucibles for me with regards to forming leadership skills for the next stage and the next chapter, because that's an experience you'll never really forget. And you can take those lessons learned and apply it going forward, whether it's your own business, your own team, or helping advise other leaders and other teams going forward.
And I think that's the right way to frame it, isn't it? You know, it's not even looking at it in terms of mistakes and failures, is it? It's just an experience you went through and a lesson that you learned. And I think, you know, we've all done that. I know I have. Something going horribly wrong at work and I obsessed about it for years. But actually now I'm far enough removed, I can look back and go, well, actually, I learned this, and I'm not going to do that again. And you can start to see it more positively. And yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Treating people like humans in any context, but especially when things are getting tough and when, well, in the case of a business, the worst has happened. And there's plenty of examples from recent history of people doing that really badly. There's one that springs to mind in particular of the CEO who fired like 500 people or something in one go in a 10-minute Zoom call. So yeah, that's definitely not the way to do it. I very much prefer your approach. Yeah. So, well, thank you for sharing that story, because I appreciate it's a hard time. So yeah, thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
From your whole career so far, what would you say is the biggest leadership lesson that you've taken from all of that experience?
So I think oftentimes it's leadership is seeing where you're trying to go with your team and where you want them to go as far as following you. But it very much is about service and influence. You know, you're serving the people who work with you and are going on the journey with you. And you're also trying to influence them to be the best that they can be in the process. So it's both being a servant and a teacher in the process.
And a learner as well, of course.
Absolutely.
And so the opposite question then, what do you think is the biggest mistake that a leader can make?
Making it all about yourself, you know, just seeing how other people can serve you and that's it. That's what I would say is the biggest mistake, because honestly, that's not leadership.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there. It's the opposite end of the spectrum almost, isn't it? Between being that sort of boss, you know, the horrible sort of bad manager that you read about versus being actually a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of the servant leadership approach as well. So I think we're probably aligned there as well.
Yeah, I would agree.
One of the things I like the most about the more modern approaches to leadership, servant leadership being one of those, is that it starts to incorporate more of an ethics aspect to leadership. So what role do you see ethics and morality playing in leadership in business?
Yeah, I think about it in the sense that it should be very much a part of what you do each day. Mm-hmm. You know, trying to think of leadership without ethics, what does that look like? Leadership without morality, what does that look like? So it's almost like you really can't effectively lead without considering the ethics of what you say and do, and the morality in terms of what type of example you're trying to lead for other people to follow. And you're hoping that people do things in the right way as far as doing what's right versus doing what's wrong, because the truth of the matter, David, is history is replete of examples of people that led groups of people unethically and groups of people with such low to no morality. And we saw what the results of those were. So I think it's one of those things that to be clear on what you stand for and what values and principles you're going to base your leadership on, and to be of the highest ethical basis as possible in the midst of your leadership, that's very significant as far as how you go about leadership and how you'll be judged in terms of how you lead others.
Yeah, and I do feel like some of those modern approaches that I've already mentioned, I do feel like they came about almost in reaction to some of the examples from history that you mentioned. Because there does come a point when you're talking about how we define leadership as a word even, there's an argument to be made that it's the act of leadership is simply getting people to follow you. And so I think that's why we've had that reaction and these newer approaches to it, because actually, if you don't add the moral component, then we get some pretty horrible things happen potentially.
Well, and to your point too, getting people to follow you now is a different way of looking in today's world.
Mm-hmm.
Getting people to follow you sounds more conducive to what people try to do on social media. But you can have 2 million followers, but what are you leading them to do? Are they just following you because they're interested in you as a celebrity and what you ate this morning, where you went last night, or with that sort of responsibility and stewardship at your helm? How are you serving them? How are you influencing them? How are you teaching them? What are you learning from them? And are you doing that in a way that you feel you could be proud of in terms of you're leading people in the right direction?
Yeah, I'm trying, as you were talking there, I was trying to think of an influencer that I would actually consider a leader. I'm clearly not fashionable enough because I can't think of any. Draw your own conclusions about my social media presence from that statement. What has been your own best experience of being led?
For me, best experience being led is being exposed to something that is timeless, that isn't something that's trending as far as like it's trending one time or another, and now it's no longer going to be in season tomorrow. I think for me, that's where it's coming off, where it's just like I keep thinking about my faith and what I've learned in the Bible in particular, as far as examples of good leaders and bad leaders, and the perfect leader that I can share about later on too. But along with that is just seeing examples of leaders have done things the right way and things have done things the wrong way, and being able to come to that as a reference point at any point in time, knowing that new situations come up every day. That's a great way for me to continue to be led, because I'm trusting a source that's going to stand it with test of time, and is showing you both good and bad to make the right decisions, and offering an opportunity to respond to that and to interact with it as well.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And in terms of, say, individuals that you may have worked for, is there any that stand out as a good example of leadership? Or bad, if you'd rather talk about a bad one, I don't mind.
Well, I'd rather stay on the positive front if I can.
Yep.
There's one leader I think of when I worked at FedEx in particular, and she was one that very much stood on principles and values and was the same whether you met with her privately or you saw her in action publicly. And I think that consistency in building a personal brand, as far as what people can expect and what people can trust and rely on, I think that was a great example for me that even to this day, like I try to embody in what I do, whether with family, friends, workplace, or beyond.
And I think that speaks to one of my favorite things about leadership. It's certainly one of the big reasons why I'm so passionate about it, but it's that meaningful, lasting impact that you can have on people's lives, their careers, certainly sticking in their memory for years to come as well. And that can be for good or bad. Obviously, we want it to be for good. You want to be the person who, maybe not deathbed, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but certainly for a decade or more to come, they're going to think back and see you as an example of good leadership and follow that even after they no longer interact with you or don't work with you anymore. Okay, this is a really difficult question, I think.
Okay.
But for some more than for others, but we'll see how you get on with it.
Okay.
If you could go back in time, right back to the beginning of your career, what would you say to your younger self?
Don't give up while you're learning. I think oftentimes when things don't pan out the way we want to throw up our hands, grab our ball, and go home. And then resort to never taking a chance or take another swing again. I think part of it is recognizing that that's just part of life. If you live it long enough, you're going to inevitably go through good times and bad times. There hasn't been a person that I know of that's had all good things happen to him or her. But oftentimes, if we're not having the right perspective of that, when bad times hit, it can hit us very significantly, even to the point of just quitting altogether. And I think that somebody told me that the only way you can truly fail is if you quit. And so I think about that in terms of, there's beauty in success and persevering and giving it another shot, trying again tomorrow, learning for what didn't go right and applying those lessons the next day. Because inevitably you still got better. And so I would say, yeah, don't give up while you're learning, because you're going to learn for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I think the while you're learning bit is a good caveat to have. The whole kind of don't give up, don't quit on things. It is another one of these double-edged swords, I feel. I think it needs to be tempered by having the self-awareness and awareness generally of knowing when something isn't right for you and that you should move on. And I think, yeah, sometimes that's really difficult, but but I think a lot of us as well, it's ingrained in us, isn't it? And we're brought up with this, and we're taught at school, don't give up once you've got a job. Job security is important. You've got to stick with it no matter what. And I think that leads a lot of people down the wrong track sometimes when they are just in the wrong job for them, and they need to just give up and go and do something else.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's part of learning. Sometimes you're learning what is a right fit for you for now. And then later on, you find out that served its purpose and it's time to move on. Or maybe you're in a place where it's not the right fit. And either there's something you can do about it while you're there, or something that may need help from others to make it better. Or maybe it's time to move on from there too. But yeah, I agree with what you're saying before. It's an important caveat, because if I said never give up, then that can seem as almost like Miss America, like misleading, like in that sort. Doesn't have really teeth to really like have substance behind, almost pithy. But while you're learning, what the basic part or premise on that is, you're going to be learning throughout the rest of your life if you're open to it. You also have the choice to not be open to learning and just being content with what you know, or just giving up altogether and being cynical. And I think for me, I would much rather go the former and being open to learning through the good and the bad, success and failures. But you're still in the game, at least.
Definitely. Yeah, I've been in jobs where I was probably the second one of those, and maybe even the third. But I think all the time I view myself as a leader, I have to also be learning. I think the second you stop learning, you're not leading either. Which I've said before. The listeners are bored of hearing me say it, probably.
Leadership Heroes.
Well, time's been flying. We must have been having fun. I've only got one question left for you. This is always my favourite one. I think you've given us a hint about what your answer is already, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So it's called Leadership Heroes. And if you had to pick one person, and they could be anyone you like, alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious even, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
So yeah, you're right. I was alluding to it earlier. I would pick Jesus Christ. I think learning from his example, whether as a believer or a non-believer, he exuded a number of qualities that I admire. One, in the sense of one that comes to mind is submission to higher authority. He's not above the law himself. Two, keeping his team or his people in mind and what he was doing to serve them. Three, being willing to sacrifice himself for the people he loves, even if that meant the ultimate sacrifice. And then also having compassion for those that needed compassion, and balancing that with having a tough word for those who needed a tough word. So having that balance of knowing when, like situational leadership, when to act certain ways, when to pull back, when to be more aggressive. That was balance. That was good as well. So I'll stop on those 4 examples because otherwise I'll start preaching. But that would be my answer. And my answer for leadership hero, it'd be Jesus.
It's a good answer, and we've had it a few times before, actually. I like the way you framed it, though. I think the situational angle is really, really good. I've not had that before. And of course, it's quite good, I think, at disagreeing without disrespecting people too. So,
right.
To bring it back to the theme in the episode as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, he's a great example as well of servant leadership, which we talked about earlier. There is a debate that's come up a few times around, should a leader always put their people first, even before themselves, or do they need to look after themselves first in order to be more effective as a leader for others? And I don't know about you, I swing back and forth on that debate.
Well, I think one way of looking at that, and I can use Jesus as an example, is that oftentimes he did have time for himself in prayer. And he filled up his cup so he can be able to pour it out for others, right? At some point, he got exhausted. He got tired just like we do. And so in some sense, to effectively serve and to lead people, you got to find time to restore. You got to find time to get rest. Otherwise, you're going to exhaust yourself because you're giving everything and you have nothing more to give. So I would think, I think there's value to be said to saying, hey, self-care is helpful to replenish yourself so you can be of utmost service to the people you're leading, without you having to say, no, you guys feed me and make it all about me.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I like that. Awesome. Well, Philip, we're pretty much out of time. Thank you so much for being with us today. The last little question I will ask you is, if anyone, any listeners would like to learn more about you and what you do, would you like to point us towards a website, or perhaps someone can get a copy of one of your many books?
Sure. So Disagree Without Disrespect, along with any of my other books, they're all listed on Amazon. So you can just look it up by the title, Disagree Without Disrespect, or more appropriately, just look up my name, Philip Blackett, PhilipBlackett, and you'll find my author page along with all the books I have listed there. You can also go to my website, philipblackett.com. And I'm also on social media as well. Facebook, Twitter. As much as we bash social media, I'm also on there too. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram. Just look up my name, Philip Blackett.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll pop several of those links in the episode description so everyone can find them easily as well. And yeah, I agree. You can't not be on social media these days, can you?
Right.
We may love it or hate it.
We're still on it.
Indeed. Yeah, it's unavoidable truth of life. Well, Philip, thank you again so much for being with us today. Really enjoyed this conversation, and have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the opportunity, David. Really appreciate it to have a conversation with you and your audience.
Well, I hope that in that conversation, Philip and I have been modelling some of the behaviours that we want to see. We may not have disagreed very much today, but I think it's fair to say we have quite different political views. And yet we've been able to have a perfectly amicable, respectful and enjoyable conversation. And I know that I've learned loads from speaking with him today. I hope you have as well, listener. If you would like to learn more about Philip, if you'd like to know more about the books he's written, perhaps get a copy of one or two of them, do give his name a search on Amazon, or check out those links in the episode description wherever you're listening or watching this right now. Thank you, and huge respect to Philip for his conversation and his time today. And thank you as well for listening, for being with us today. I hope you'll be back again next week when I'll be discussing conflict, communication, and more with communication coach to the parents of preteens, Marcus Aurelius Higgs. It's a wide-ranging and slightly off-the-beaten-path conversation, at least for this podcast, that nevertheless offers some intriguing leadership insights. So don't miss that one. And until I speak to you again, stay safe, keep disagreeing with respect, and be a leader, not a boss.